thank you everyone for coming. It's a great turnout, actually. We were hoping to get a lot of folks in the room to go over where we have been, where we're at, and where we're headed with the LCME re-accreditation process. It's interesting that it's a pretty mixed crowd in the room. Some of you are pros at this. Some of us are novices, and so we're going to try to sort of strike a balance. So we're not going over stuff too repetitively for people who are familiar with it, but for people who aren't as familiar, so you have a sense of what's going on. All of us in some capacity are going to have to be pretty actively involved when the LCME site visitors actually come around. So a lot of this information is important, even if it's being repeated today, it's being repeated to reinforce it, because these are some of the questions that any one of us may get asked when the site visitors come. Because frankly, some of the questions they ask are about what the process was like for people. Was it thorough? Did it start on time? Was it comprehensive? Was it inclusive of people? So if some of the stuff you see is familiar, I apologize, but it's really good to reinforce it over and over again between now and October when the site visitors come. So this is an overview of what we're going to focus on for this session. We'll go over sort of the big picture arc of the accreditation process, talk about where we're at now, what's next, and then what you can do to contribute to the process too. If you're just coming in and you haven't gotten pizza, get pizza. Unless you don't want pizza. Okay, so we're going to start with a little interactive, just a couple of interactive questions to get a sense of where the audience is at. Hopefully you know how to use Poll Everywhere. Are you familiar with the accreditation process, A, B, C, or D? Go. Well, I guess we're done. Okay, there may still be some answers, but it's pretty much what we were saying before. It's kind of a mixed audience, and this will help us gauge how much detail to go into over the course of the rest of the slides that we're going to discuss. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is also an interactive question. The accreditation process seems extremely easy. I could do most of the work myself. Pretty simple, I don't see much changing. C, unsure, I need some more information. D, difficult but doable. E, basically impossible, do we really need to be accredited? It's a great question. We'll address that question later. Okay, so this, even though the slide is a little bit goofy and meant to be lighthearted, I find the results actually pretty interesting. I think many of us have been doing a lot of LCME-related work. Like every other huge project, when you're in it, it can seem completely overwhelming and frankly impossible to accomplish, especially when the stakes are high, and especially when the deadline is far enough away and you really have to pace yourself carefully. I'm heartened to see that lots of people in the room acknowledge the difficulty of it, but feel like it's doable. We can do this. We're obviously doing it. We're obviously going to do it, but it's good to see that people aren't feeling overwhelmed to the point where it seems like we're just never going to climb out of this process, because we are. This is broad overview, and I'll also say that if you have questions along the way, you can raise your hand at any point. This is not meant to be, a full-on didactic presentation. We can stop and talk about things that aren't clear, and obviously there'll be time at the end for more questions if you're interested. There are also people who are watching this live stream. So if they're sending questions in by computer, Maggie will call them out on the mic, and we'll try to address them too. So the LCME is, as many of you know, is the accreditation authority for medical schools across the nation. It's sponsored by the AAMC and the AMA. Our last accreditation experience was almost 8 years ago. At the time, we got what's called a full cycle. So if you do really well, you may end up with a couple of citations, but a full cycle is 8 years, so we're due now. That full cycle is still 8 years, so our goal is full cycle. There's a lot more scrutiny now, 8 years later, than there was in the past. Many of the rules have changed significantly. We'll talk a little bit about what some of those changes are. There are a much higher number of schools who are placed on probation, but not a higher number of schools who lose accreditation. There used to be more schools who lost accreditation temporarily. So there are more schools on probation, and there are more schools who receive more significant citations. The citations typically mean that the LCME creates a shorter time span for them to come back and check in on you again with very, very specific, sometimes rigid expectations for what needs to be addressed or fixed by the time they come back. There are a number of new monitoring requirements that are focused on continuous quality improvement, or CQI. That is now threaded through everything that happens in the medical school. That's probably the biggest sort of sea change that's happened in the accreditation process. And CQI, for those of you who are familiar with it, and some of you maybe aren't, is a pretty generic process for identifying a problem based on data, addressing the problem, collecting data to figure out whether you've addressed the problem appropriately, and then collecting the data and addressing it over and over again in continuous cycles. There are lots more requirements on the management of clinical sites. Again, as most of you know, about 5-ish years ago, we went from being a big hospital with a couple of affiliates to a massive health system. And so the difference there is the amount of effort that it takes to manage clinical sites across the whole health system, because those are all our hospitals now, is pretty significant. And there are a lot more requirements related to course outcomes. There's a strong focus on faculty-driven governance, process, and participation. And so what that means, at least briefly, is that in the past, a lot of the thinking, the strategizing, the decisions that were made, the policy making happened among a relatively small group of people, many of whom are sitting in this room. Sometimes we would reach out to a little bit of a larger group of people depending on what it is that we were working on. The LCME's expectations is that an entire institution, or in our case, an entire health system, has the opportunity to contribute to that process of decision making and policy making. So you have to put systems in place then to give lots of people a chance to look at the work that you're doing while you're doing it and weigh in on it, and also give those people a chance to sit on committees and take an active part in the process. And that's related to the last bullet, which is a lot more scrutiny on policy approval processes. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. The components of the accreditation look like this. Some of you have seen this slide before. This is basically the data and information that we have been in the process of compiling and that we'll submit August 5th to the LCME. They include the graduation questionnaire, which is a national questionnaire distributed by the AAMC, reams and reams of data about every conceivable experience that happens in a medical school. There's something called the Independent Student Analysis, the ISA, which is a student-generated, student-managed survey. In our school, unlike most schools, students have been doing an annual survey every year. They do it every year, and we look at the data. In the year of your LCME review, the LCME has very specific questions that need to be included in that student-generated survey. So it's still student-run, but with input from the LCME in terms of what kinds of questions need to be asked. And the students have done an incredible job of distributing the survey, collecting the data, analyzing it, and creating a report. There's something called the DCI, which is the biggest document. The data collection instrument is the document that addresses the LCME's questions based on all of their standards, the 12 standards, and each standard has many, many elements. That's the language, the jargon that they use. So the DCI ends up being, with its appendices, probably 500-600 pages. And we'll talk about where we're at in terms of the creation of the DCI. As I said, the DCI has appendices, comprehensive document containing policies, procedures, organizational structures, committee types, et cetera. And then there's a self-study summary report, and that summary report is a 30-page synopsis that we have to create based on the DCI. So these are the 5 components that the LCME will get. The site visitors will read through all of it. Usually they divide it up, but there's a lot of overlap in the work that they do. So it's an incredible amount of effort on their part to prepare for a site visit at an institution. The group that has been kind of overseeing organizationally, administratively, operationally, this process is LCME Ops. You see the names of the people there who have been involved, continue to be involved, and the role that they've played. The first two roles, faculty accreditation lead and site visit coordinator, are sort of technical terms that the LCME uses. All the rest of the terms are terms that we have created for people who are contributing in a very meaningful way to this process. And on the right side, you see what the responsibilities have been for LCME Ops. So it's oversight of schedule management, the DCI, which I mentioned before, making sure that we have deadlines and that we adhere to the deadlines, tracking all the milestones, assigning content experts, working with the subcommittees on their work to create their subcommittee reports. Communications like this, engagement, newsletters, Change Now, the website, and making sure that the community at large, which includes everyone from staff and faculty and students to trustees and the leadership of the institution, are aware of where we're at in the LCME process. Those are actually some of the questions that the site visitors might ask, is how aware we have made people across the institution of this process and its importance. And then preparation for the site visit itself, which is, as you see, their logistics agenda and making sure that everything is in place so that it runs smoothly and seamlessly. In the process of doing this, a number of quality improvement teams were created. They've been around now for a while and continue to do their work, and they will continue to exist and do their work moving forward because of what we said before about the continuous quality improvement initiatives that have to become part and parcel of how we manage a medical school. So the three teams are listed there. You can pretty much tell from their title what it is that they are responsible for overseeing in terms of CQI. There's administration and diversity quality improvement, curricular and student affairs QI, and admissions and enrollment QI. They've been meeting regularly, trying to ensure continuous quality improvement and identifying gaps and building or restructuring systems to reach compliance. An interesting part of this process, which a lot of us have talked about over the course of time, is understanding that in a lot of medical schools, and I'll go back a step, before your self-study and site visit, someone from your institution is asked to come and do a site visit at another medical school. One of the interesting things that we are in the process of figuring out is, how do you describe that? In other words, you want to be able to say honestly that up until a certain point, this is what our process was like, this is how we made policies, these are what our committees looked like, and now that we understand what the standards and elements expect of us, we've put this new process in place. So that continuous quality improvement is going to have to include a description of, up until a certain point, this is the way we did it, and now moving forward, we're doing it differently. It's a little bit unnerving because it's new, and because as a school going into the process, you don't know exactly what's going to sort of satisfy the LCME. Our impression in general is that they don't expect us to have been doing it this way for the last 5 years, for example, because their standards and elements haven't been the same for the last 5 years. So just to give you a sense of a little bit of the tension around the timing and how things are described. I don't know if you can see this, the color's a little bit light, but on the bottom you can see in general what the timeline has been like going back to April 2018, and then ending in July 19, which is where we're at now. As I said, all of the information is submitted in August, and you can get a sense from the bottom if you can even see, although I don't know if you can see it so well, what the timeline has been like, and I'll walk through in a couple of other slides what's happened at each of those junctures. And then the structure of it you see above. So there are, it looks like sort of the sun and the planets, or a bunch of moons around Mars. LCME Ops I described before. Medical Education Planning Action Committee has been an oversight body for the process since the start. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moons over there are the subcommittees. Each subcommittee has addressed a set of standards and the elements in those standards. They've created a chunk of the DCI, of the data collection instrument. They've written summary reports from each of their subcommittees. All those summary reports get fed to that blue thing in the middle, the self-study task force, which is the steering committee for the process. And that steering committee waits towards the end, around now. And what we do is we give them the executive summary, a draft of the executive summary, and we divide the DCI, the big 500-600 page DCI, among members of the task force, and we ask them to do an overread of the DCI in sections and make sure that it is consistent with and coherent related to the executive summary. Because what we don't want is for there to be disconnects. And as I said before, when you are in the thick of it and focused, too narrowly focused on the process, it's easy to lose track of whether things are being described in a consistent way or even if they make sense. So that's kind of the structure of the self-study process. And as I said, the task force's job is to help us complete the executive summary, kind of refine and polish it. They'll have reading assignments of the DCI. They'll do a fair amount of reading and editing, hopefully not too much editing because we'll have it in really good shape for them. And the people on the task force are basically senior administrative leaders, faculty, and student representatives as well. The ISA is the independent student analysis. So the team of students who did this issued the annual comprehensive evaluation months and months ago. They gauged student opinions on a variety of things, curricular, student affairs, admissions, many things across the medical school, again with the required questions that the LCME expects to be in there. And then their report breaks things down into the school's strengths, the school's areas for improvement, and then specific recommendations from students for improvement. If you have paid a little bit of attention to this, you realize that the LCME site visitors are getting lots of streams of data. So this is a big chunk of data. The graduation questionnaire is another big chunk of data. The DCI has in it a lot of that data in tables, sort of extracted from the GQ and the ISA, but it also has data from course evaluations. So there are lots of different places that the site visitors are going to take a look at data, sometimes data that address the same question, but may look very different because some of it is coming from the ISA, which is the 4 years of medical students' perspective. Some of it is coming from the GQ, which is just the graduating students' perspective. Some of it is in real time, like course and clerkship evaluations that students fill out right away afterwards. So it's going to be an interesting mix of what the data looks like and how to reconcile that across all of those sources. And needless to say, because of the amount of effort that goes into a process like this, and because of the richness of data that we end up with, in addition to accreditation, is going to drive what our short and longer term outcomes goals are for the next coming years. Because this is the perfect opportunity, anytime a school goes through this, to pause in the cycle right after the site visit is over, and then take a careful look at who we are, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we may need to do some things differently. So where we are now in the process, the DCI was drafted. We brought in PwC, which is PricewaterhouseCoopers, as a consulting group to review the first drafts of the DCI. And what they did was essentially a gap analysis. They overread everything that was written down. The benefit from them is that a couple of things. They have a team that just does LCME consultation. They've become experts at it. The other benefit to them is that they do this at a lot of schools, and so they're not at all shy about doing sort of a comparative analysis and telling us where we need to be at. They've sat through a lot of LCME site visits themselves. They know how site visitors respond to certain information or data and how to frame things. So that gap analysis was invaluable. We redrafted the DCI based on their feedback. That's where that is right now. Probably in the next week or two at the most, the DCI will have gone through its kind of final draft for content and style. All of the standards are coming in right now in the next couple of days. And linked to that, the executive summary, which is the 30-page synopsis of the DCI, will be done at about the same time. So a lot of this stuff is happening in parallel. At the same time, we're beginning to build or complete the DCI appendix, which is compiling all of the supporting information that I described before. And again, that goes in on August 5th with the general submission. The ISA, the student group, has finalized a survey. They've completed their report, and we have that. And then the site visit preparation. Site visit preparation is not just what I mentioned before, which is kind of the logistics and scheduling and organization for the site visit itself. It's actually this. And we've been doing this or things like this for the last couple of weeks. Informational sessions, and then much more intensive training sessions or boot camps, if you will, for people we know are going to be in front of the site visitors when they come here in October. So that has been happening for a couple of weeks now. It will continue to happen in smaller cohorts. So for example, clerkship directors, course directors, chairs of departments, students will have those sessions all the way probably through the middle of July, maybe even till the end of July, to make sure that people are prepared and that they have the material they need to read in anticipation of what first will come, which is the mock site visit, before the site visit itself. So I'll talk a little bit about this, but most schools, I would even say all schools, in addition to doing all this preparation and training, usually bring people in, peers who are experts, usually from schools that have recently gone through their LCME process, to do a mock site visit. So the site visit itself is in October. It's about 3.5 days long. A mock site visit is usually 2 days long. And they basically, we will mimic every single session that the LCME site visitors will have. We will mimic that in the 2 days. We'll have the people who come and do the mock site visit read all of our material before they come. This is going to happen in September. So they'll have the DCI, they'll have the student survey, they'll have the GQ, they'll have all of the information. They'll review it beforehand. They will be as critical as they can possibly be with us and really push us hard. Lots of you will be involved in those sessions. And then we'll get feedback from them so that we have between September and October, when the site visitors come for the real thing, to get our act together and be as polished as we can possibly be. The site visit, as it describes here, is pretty carefully choreographed by the LCME. In other words, they don't just say, we're coming for 3.5 days, tell us who you want to meet with. They tell us exactly what sessions they want to have, which standards will be covered in which sessions. They don't tell us specific people they want to see in the room. They'll say, we want course directors in the room. We want teaching faculty in the room. We want junior faculty in the room. We want 3rd and 4th year students in the room, and then we will collect people and then prepare the people who are collected to do this ahead of time so they know what to expect. And some of those categories of folks that we're going to include as participants are listed over there. And then on the right side, again, you can see how the LCME lays out even things like we would like to have breakfast with the residents. And again, this is a sort of standard site visit. And we know they want to see house staff. We want to know which elements, 3.6, 9.1, 9.3, they're going to ask questions of the house staff, which is incredibly helpful because you can't ask anyone, whether it's a resident or a student or faculty, to read 500 pages of a DCI, but you can give them those elements and say, look, this is what the group is going to focus on for the most part in terms of the questions they'll ask you. Having said that, the site visitors, I'm not going to say they can do whatever they want to do. They can't do whatever they want to do, but they can veer from the script. So even though they have residents in the room and they're going to ask about student mistreatment, resident preparation for teaching, and clinical supervision of medical students, they're perfectly allowed to ask kind of broad questions about the institution that are related to LCME standards. I'm trying to see if there's something here that kind of jumps out at me, but not necessarily. In other words, they're not going to ask the residents something granular about how the medical school makes policy, but they might ask the residents how familiar they are with the institution's strategic plan. What is the vision of Mount Sinai? What's its mission? What are the strategic goals of the institution? So each group that comes in front of the site visitors will be very, very prepared to talk about the elements we know are going to be asked about, and they'll also kind of get a general background presentation on those kinds of questions because they may very well come up. Okay, so as I said before, the sort of more intense training sessions or boot camps are going to happen June through hopefully just the beginning of August. There will be faculty, staff, students involved. Many of you will be involved. You'll get advance notice. We'll schedule it around your calendars as best we can. We will probably invite and train more people than we need, just because of the variability of people's schedules. We don't want to end up short, obviously. So if you're invited to come to these, please come. It's critically important that you do. But at the end of the day, it may be a smaller group that actually has to participate with the site visitors. It's also possible that you came to a boot camp for training, you were selected to be on the site visit as a site visit participant, and then the day before something happened and you can't come. You got sick, you got called away, and so even if you weren't selected, it's better to have it's better to have a bigger pool so that we can pull people in case we need to. The mock site visit is September 12th and 13th, 2 days. The full survey visit is October 27th through 30th. And then this is the last slide, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Everyone in this room in one way or another has been involved in the process, pretty much everyone in the room. Maybe not the students who've just shown up for their summer experience, at least not yet, but you've probably had a little bit of a taste of it based on the buzz you hear around you. This is a very hands-on, active process. There will be a little bit of a lull somewhere between August and September, but right now we're not in lull. And so every single person in the room, to varying degrees, and each of you kind of knows the scope of what you've been doing around the LCME and what needs to get done. It's a really active, hands-on, not just active, proactive process. And that's really what this slide is mostly about. We can't afford to be passive about it or wait for somebody to email me. If you're aware of what's going on, if you have the ability to get involved, just feel free to ask questions. Stay informed, stay connected, stay prepared, get involved, be reflective. The goal of this is not to present some sort of magical, perfect Mount Sinai to the site visitors. That's never the goal. And that's not their expectation. They never see a school that's kind of gotten it all right and there's nothing to talk about. The goal is to be critical and reflective in the site visit itself, in the collection of all the information and the narratives that we send them, to be completely honest about places where we know we have gaps and weaknesses, to have a thoughtful plan in place for addressing those gaps and weaknesses. Some of those plans are things that we managed to put in place 6 months ago, and so by the time the site visitors come, we'll have a little bit of a track record of data to show them that things are better. And some of the things that we identify as gaps, we really won't have much in place actively, but we'll have a plan for. And that obviously creates discomfort and some vulnerability, but that's the approach. The approach is to say, here's where we're vulnerable, completely honest and forthright. Here's what we're hoping to do to fix it. Here where the resources are coming from to fix it. And then they make their determination. They might say, it's great, your plan sounds really terrific, no problem. Or the plan sounds terrific, but we really need to see some evidence that it's working, some data. We'll be back in 3 months or 6 months or a year. So it's hard to say how that's going to play out, but definitely the approach to it is not to pretend if you actually, for example, are sitting in the site visits if you're sitting in a session with the site visitors and they're asking a question, and the answer to the question is not as good as it should be, the answer is what the answer needs to be. It's not trying to paint a rosier picture than what we actually have in place. Okay, that's all the slides. So, questions or comments about any of this or anything else you've heard about the LCME? Maggie's at the laptop, Megan's got the mic. Questions or anything that people in the room who've been very involved want to point out that we haven't talked about yet? Nelson.
So are the boot camps supposed to inform or prepare the people that are potentially being selected for site visitor like interaction? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, they are. And the boot camps, as opposed to sessions like this that are kind of general informational, the boot camps are going to focus specifically, right? So if there's a boot camp for clerkship directors, it's going to drill down on the elements you see listed there. And the clerkship directors will get the material to read from the DCI and the executive summary. And then they'll be put through their paces during the mock site visit. Does that answer the question? Anything we haven't touched on? Shashi, Maggie, Rena, Val, Pete, anybody? I mean, there's lots of people in the room who have at least as much expertise in this as I do, so. Or was it just perfect?
That's very good.
Oh, that's weird. All right, I mean, we don't want to keep people if everyone feels like we're done. Last minute questions. Obviously, if you think of a question afterwards or have a question and you feel like it's a little uncomfortable to ask it, let's say no one asks, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to many of us, Maggie, Shashi, Michelle, and you can reach out to one of us who've been involved, very involved on LCME Ops, for example, and we'll be happy to address any concerns or questions you might have. All right, thanks for coming. Thanks for eating the pizza.